Even if you've never heard of Hedy Lamarr, she influenced your life. Hedy was the model that Snow White was based on. She inspired Catwoman, and she invented a technology that served as the framework for the Bluetooth and Wi-Fi that we use every single day. This Austrian beauty came to be known as the most beautiful girl in the world, but her life story is so much deeper than that. Today, we're exploring her life while creating this inspired makeup look. Let's learn about the simple, complicated story of Hedy Lamarr. Hedy Lamarr was born Hedwig Eva Maria Kiesler in Vienna, Austria on November 9th, 1914. This makes Hedy a Scorpio, and her children would later say that Hedy was a woman of many faces, but she was incredibly simple on the inside. This is very indicative of a Scorpio, taking on different personas and outward appearances are a way that they put up a shell to protect their inner selves. Hedy was an only child. Her parents were Emil and Gertrude. They were a wealthy Jewish family. They lived in a very nice district in Vienna, and her father was a bank director at a bank in Vienna. So as a child, Hedy attended a private school. She took piano lessons, ballet lessons, science, language classes. She loved to learn, and she had a very keen interest in theater and film, but also in science and technology. She really liked the nuts and bolts of how things work. When she was only 5 years old, she took apart a little music box and put it back together because she wanted to see how it functioned. Her father would foster this incredible curiosity by taking her on these long walks where he would explain to her how things worked. Like, that's a street light and here's how it works, and that's a street car and here's how it gets the electricity and the tracks, here's how it runs. So he would explain to her all these things, and that really fed her inventive curiosity as a child. This caused Hedy to associate invention with her father, and Hedy was incredibly close to her father. He was a huge influence in her life, and she just loved him so dearly that later various people in her life would kind of describe him as the great love of her life. When Hedy was 12 years old, she was already incredibly beautiful. She would walk into a room and conversations would just stop. She wins a beauty contest in Vienna, and shortly after, she begins taking acting classes. When she's 16, she gets hired by the largest studio in Vienna to be a script girl. I'm assuming that's just someone that handles the scripts and keeps track of everybody's scripts. So quite quickly, that film studio puts her in small roles in a few films. And then 2 years later, in 1933, that would be weird, right? In 1933, when Hedy is 18 years old, she simultaneously angers the Pope and Hitler with her breakout role in the film Ecstasy. So, if you tick off the Pope and Hitler, you're kind of covering like a very wide range of people that you could offend and piss off. In the film, Hedy makes history when she simulates what is thought to be the first on-screen orgasm. Possibly. We're not 100% sure. Somebody could have filmed one. We would have no way to know. But most people think it is the first one, so we're going to go with that. The expression was the result of someone sticking her with a pin off camera. The film also features some brief nude scenes of Hedy, which she was apparently unaware of. The director used a telephoto lens to get those shots. She says she didn't really know they were going to be in the film, but it's also possible that she just said that because reaction to this film was extremely, extremely strong. Overnight, this film gets worldwide recognition, and the reviews are as mixed could be. People either thought that it was this great art house, artistic expression, or they thought that it was absolute filth. There was really no in between. For example, in Europe, the film won a couple film awards at film festivals, but in Nazi Germany and in the United States, it was banned. So overnight, Hedy is globally known, in some ways good, and in some people's minds really badly. Around the same time that Ecstasy premieres, Hedy stars in the play Sissy, which is about the Empress Elizabeth of Austria. Hedy gets incredible reviews from both critics and theatergoers, and she wins a lot of admirers because she is gorgeous. She has admirers sending her roses to her dressing room. They try to get backstage to meet her, and one of these admirers is a man named Friedrich Mandel. Now, the very first sentence of Friedrich Mandel's Wikipedia entry reads, "a prominent fascist." Yikes. Oh, and he was also an arms merchant. But you know, there's some serious red flags when arms merchant doesn't even make it into the first sentence of your Wikipedia entry. Like, yeah. Friedrich was the third richest man in Austria at the time, and he became obsessed with Hedy. And he was so charming and so wealthy that eventually Hedy was able to overlook the fact that Friedrich had ties to Benito Mussolini and later Adolf Hitler. Hedy was Jewish, but Friedrich, he was Catholic. He was Catholic and he had been born to a Jewish father and a Catholic mother. So he insists that Hedy converts to Catholicism in order for them to marry. Hedy agrees. She converts to Catholicism, much to the chagrin of her parents. And on August 10th, 1933, 18-year-old Hedy marries 33-year-old Friedrich at a beautiful, beautiful church in Vienna. They moved to a castle home on the border of Czechoslovakia and Austria. Friedrich, or Fitz as he was nicknamed, he would sometimes take Hedy to his business meetings because he was very controlling and he didn't like for her to be out of his sight. So often these meetings would be with scientists, and Hedy would go to these meetings, and it really sparked, kind of reignited that spark that she had for invention and for science. Fritz did business with both Mussolini and Hitler by supplying arms and munitions to Nazi Germany and fascist Italy. However, Hitler took a lot of pains to not be seen in public with Fritz because although Fritz was a practicing Catholic and had a Catholic mother, his Jewish father meant that in the eyes of the Nazis, he was Jewish. But apparently that didn't bother Fritz too much because his primary religion was money. In addition to being a well-known fascist, Fritz was very jealous and paranoid. He consistently talked himself into believing that Hedy was having an affair. He would have the maids listen to her phone calls. He would spy on her relentlessly, and Hedy began to feel pretty trapped in the marriage. Her situation became more urgent as Austria got closer to the Anschluss. Now, if you've never seen The Sound of Music, you might not know what the Anschluss is. It was the annexation of Austria by Nazi Germany. Now, in the lead up to the Anschluss, there was a lot of tension in Austria, especially for people of the Jewish faith or of Jewish heritage. Hitler felt that because Austrians spoke German and because Austria used to be part of an empire with Germany, that it needed to be German again, and he was going to get it back under German control. In the lead up to this, there are curfews put in place for Jews in Austria, and their home country is no longer a place where they can exist with any peace of mind. Now, this is scary, extra scary for Hedy, because not only is this happening to, Jewish Austrians, that they're, facing this really terrible time, she's also realizing, oh, we're getting ever closer to Hitler being legitimately in charge of Austria. And Hitler is a man who in 1933 banned her film Ecstasy, and when he banned it, he cited the fact that she was Jewish. He specifically said he was banning that film because the star, Hedy, was Jewish. So can you imagine someone bans your movie because of your religion, and then you're looking at the ever-increasing possibility that they are going to be in charge of your country? That is scary. Very scary. And the stress of this impending annexation would contribute to the sudden heart attack that killed Hedy's beloved father, Emil. The death of Emil is the straw that breaks the camel's back for Hedy. She has been living under a controlling husband. She's living under the threat of a controlling fascist regime. She is under fire daily, and this stress has now contributed to the death of her father. She wants out of Austria, but Fritz is so controlling that Hedy knows to get out, she can't just, sneak out the back door one day. She's going to have to really take steps to make a plan. And so that's what she does. She comes up with this very smart, calculated plan to get herself out of Austria. So one night while Hedy and Fritz are hosting a dinner party, Hedy puts her very well thought out plan into action. And what she does is she spikes the tea of her maid with a sleeping powder. When the maid falls asleep, Hedy puts the maid in her own bed, Hedy's own bed, as like a decoy. Then she puts on a maid uniform that she had taken to disguise herself, and she grabs her coat, but not just any coat. Hedy had sewn all of her most expensive jewels into the lining of this coat. This is her insurance policy to, whenever she gets where she's going, that she's gonna have something she can sell so that she can support herself. So she puts on that coat, she sneaks out undetected, and she rides into the night on a bicycle. Hedy eventually makes it to London, and when she gets there, she stays with friends of her parents. While she's staying with them, they go to the movies, and Hedy's attention is caught by the roaring, that's such a hard word to say, like roar, roaring, whoosh. The lion, the MGM lion, I'll put it here, the one that, he roars. Her attention is caught by this logo, and she decides, you know what, I should revisit acting. Like, this is my ticket here. Let me revisit acting. That's what I can do to support myself. So she finds an American talent agent, and he arranges a meeting for her. Hedy goes to this meeting at a London hotel where she meets what she describes as a little man. She doesn't know who the little man is initially, but as luck would have it, that little man was Louis B. Mayer, the head of MGM. He was scouting for talent in Europe at this time because he figured that all the talented actors and actresses were probably fleeing Nazi Germany. And he was right. Louis offers Hedy a contract for $125 a week, which would be about $2,000 today. But Hedy says, no, I'm worth more. And she walks out of the meeting. Ever persistent though, Hedy realizes, I do need a job, but I want more money. So she books a ticket on the SS Normandy, which is the same New York-bound ocean liner that Louis will be traveling on to return to the US. During the trip from London to New York City, Hedy makes herself very noticeably seen on the deck. She just looks so radiant and beautiful. And then on the second night of the trip, she dresses herself up in her best gown, her best jewels that she still has left, the ones that she smuggled out in her coat, and she glides into the dining room of the ship. Everyone is staring at her. All eyes are on her. She is just so beautiful, and she's stunning. She's stunning. Louis B. Mayer, he sees this and he knows, I have got to offer her more money. So Louis offers her $500 a week, almost $9,000 in today's money, and Hedy accepts. He also persuades Hedy to change her name from Hedwig Kiesler, as she has been known up until this point, to Hedy Lamarr, in an homage to silent film star Barbara Lamarr. This was actually the suggestion of Louis's wife, Margaret. When Hedy arrives in Hollywood, Louis B. Mayer begins promoting her as the most beautiful woman in the world, and that is what she will become known as. People will always associate that phrase in Hollywood with Hedy Lamarr. So that is the unique selling proposition of Hedy Lamarr. She is the most beautiful woman in the world, and MGM, they are marketing her before she even appears in her first US film. That first US film is Algiers opposite Charles Boyer. The film creates a national sensation. According to moviegoers, everyone literally gasped when Hedy first appeared on the screen. She took everyone's breath away. Again, she was just stunning. I thought for sure this had to be an exaggeration when I heard it, so I myself went and watched Algiers, and it is not an exaggeration. She is literally so beautiful All of the actresses at the time, they noticed this and they began parting their hair in the middle, darkening it, and changing their makeup to mimic Hedy Lamarr. She is the woman that men want to be with and the woman that all women want to be. Overnight, Hedy is the it girl. She hangs out with Pablo Picasso, Orson Welles, Howard Hughes. She even goes out on a date with John F. Kennedy. I mean, this is before he's married. So this is like, she's not even a mistress. Like, he goes on a legit date with her. That's when you know you're a big deal. Hedy could have any man she wanted, and so everyone is really surprised when it turns out that the man Hedy wants is Gene Markey. Gene Markey was a screenwriter, and a lot of people felt that it was an odd choice because he was not as conventionally attractive as, say, Clark Gable. But Hedy was madly in love with him. She wrote these beautiful letters to her mother talking about how when she left Austria, she thought that she could never love anyone again. And then she met Gene. He had many traits in common with her father, and this really appealed to Hedy. The two married in 1939, and they adopt a son named James, which we're going to revisit a little bit later because there's an asterisk on this that does not come out of the woodwork for many years. Anyway, unfortunately, within a few months of marrying, Gene begins to see other women. And I think what happened here is that Gene's profile got really upped by the fact that he was married to the most beautiful woman in the world. And that made him more attractive to some women. I mean, I'm not saying this to be catty or to put down other women, but there are legitimately some people of both sexes who find a person more attractive when they have an attractive partner. It's almost like a validation of like, oh, well, if the most beautiful woman in the world wants to be with him, obviously he must be something special. Hedy was devastated by this betrayal. She's only 1 year out from her big break in Algiers, and she is struggling in her personal life and in her professional life. She has been typecast in several films as, the glamorous foreign seductress with this foreign accent. But these films have mostly been flops. So she goes to Louis B. Mayer and she talks him into giving her a role in the 1940 film Boomtown with Clark Gable, Claudette Colbert, and Spencer Tracy. Her part in the film is small, but the film is a huge success and her role is memorable enough that it puts her in high demand. Hedy is incredibly busy in the year 1940 as she films the movies Come Live With Me, Comrade X, and Ziegfeld Girl. Ziegfeld Girl premiered in 1941 and it starred Hedy, Judy Garland, and Lana Turner as aspiring showgirls. I talked a lot about the premise of the film in my Lana Turner Beauty Biography. I will link that up above if you haven't seen it yet. This film was a blockbuster, and images from the film are perhaps some of the most recognizable of Hedy. We see her in the flowing white gown with the star halo and the jewelry. It's just classic Hedy Lamarr. Hedy is extremely successful at this time in her acting career, but her schedule is incredibly grueling. She's working sometimes 6 days a week, up to 16 hours a day, and you'd think that all she would want to do is go home and sleep. But no, when she gets home, she's not going to sleep and she's not out partying. Instead, she's staying up nightly to work on her inventions. Inventing was Hedy's passion outside of acting. She had an invention table in her home, and her one-time boyfriend, millionaire aviator Howard Hughes, he always pops up, like always. Always. One day we'll have to cover Howard Hughes, but I don't know how I'm going to do an inspired Howard Hughes makeup look. If you have an idea of how I could do that, leave it in the comments below. Get my creative brain flowing. So Howard Hughes gives her this scientific equipment kit, like a kind of portable one, that she sets up in her trailer. And that way, in between takes, she can go back to her trailer and tinker around with her different inventions. Howard Hughes designed airplanes, so he and Hedy had this very inventive spirit in common. Their connection was very intellectual because according to Hedy, he was the worst lover she ever had, like biblically speaking. Hedy would collect pictures of the fastest birds and fish for Howard because she thought that this would be good for him to look at so that he can make his airplanes more aerodynamic and faster. And it actually worked. Hedy helped Howard a lot, and he also helped her. He gave her the full support of his scientists. They were at her disposal. He employed many scientists, and so whenever she wanted their help with her inventions, they were there for her. And he's like, you know what? Have carte blanche. Whatever you want, whatever Hedy wants, Hedy gets. So everything's going swimmingly for Hedy. She's super successful. She's a huge international film star, but she's in a really tough place. World War II is raging, and her mother manages to flee Austria and make it to London. But leaving London to make it to the US proves to be more difficult because at this time, transatlantic passenger flights are still not commonplace. They will not become common until after World War II. So the way that people get from London to the US is by ship. What's the problem with that? Well, Nazi Germany had an incredible fleet of U-boats, and they were dominating the war at this point. During the summer of 1940, there was actually a ship, a British ocean liner, that was carrying a bunch of children to the US, and it was sunk by the German, and 83 children and all the rest of the other passengers died. So getting on a ship, not the best idea at that time. The British ships were a little bit outdated, and because the German U-boats were very agile and modern, this really put the English at a disadvantage. Hedy knows this, and she begins thinking, how could we kind of even the playing field between the Brits and the Germans when it comes to the ships? And because Hedy is a literal genius, she thinks, well, you know what would do the trick? A radio-controlled torpedo. Now, let's have a history lesson on how ships and torpedoes work. So when you fire a torpedo from a ship, the ship and the torpedo need to have communication with each other because it's not like Battleship where you're just like, you know, torpedo to B3 and that's it. Like it just stays on that same course. You want the ability to move the course of the torpedo because ships are literal moving targets. So there has to be a communication channel between the ship and the torpedo. And generally the way you do that is on a radio frequency. The problem is that a radio frequency is not secure. When the enemy finds your radio frequency, like it's the same as like when you turn a radio to a channel. So say you're on like AM 300 and your torpedo is on AM 300. Well, when the Nazis figure out that you're on AM 300, they can now interfere. They can jam the signal where you can no longer communicate with your torpedo and, well, now you're just out of luck. So Hedy has the idea to invent a technology where the ship and the torpedo could change their frequency in tandem, meaning that the ship and the torpedo are consistently hopping along different frequencies. So even if the Germans were to figure out that they're on, you know, quote, AM 300, they can only jam the communication for like a split second because 1 second later, the ship and the torpedo both have moved to a different frequency that the Germans now don't know where they are. That makes the radio communication more secure. Hedy got this idea from remote controls, and she gets the idea and she knows a music composer named George Antel, and he helps her engineer this idea into a reality. This invention was incredibly personal to both Hedy and George. Hedy was from Austria, and she had her homeland ripped away from her by Hitler, and she hated him, and she wanted him dead. And, you know, she's going to get her wish in a few years, but, you know, until then, she wanted to be proactive. So very personal to her, and very personal also to George, because his younger brother was the first American casualty of World War II. So this is incredibly... This is like a passion of theirs. This is something that they're doing with just in a situation where they feel like powerless. They decide, no, we're not going to be powerless. We're going to do something. We're going to contribute in some way, which is incredibly inspiring. The frequency hopping technology that Hedy and George come up with was granted a full patent, and they donate this patent to the National Inventors Council so that it can be used in national defense. But at the time, the Navy turned their nose up at this technology, and they instead encouraged Hedy to use her time to raise money for war bonds instead. Like, hey, little lady, we don't need your inventions. Just, you know, go smile and give out some kisses and raise some money with some war bonds. So Hedy decides, you know what, I'll do that too, because clearly you need my help. So Hedy goes, she sells these war bonds. She appears often at the Hollywood Canteen, which is a place where Hollywood stars would entertain troops. And when all was said and done, Hedy raised about $25 million in war bonds. In today's money, that is around $340 million. You're welcome. I say you're welcome, but did anyone thank Hedy? No, they didn't. Because in a very insulting move, the US government in 1942 seized Hedy's patent because she was not yet a US citizen. They considered her to be an enemy alien because she was a citizen of Austria, and Austria is now under Nazi Germany control. So, wow, way to insult someone that's helping us. And to just keep piling on this theme of like insulting Hedy Lamarr, in 1942, Louis B. Mayer requires Hedy to appear in one of the most terrible films ever, White Cargo. It is a third-rate film that heavily features what I can only describe as like brown face. I mean, I don't even understand what they were going for here. I think they wanted to make her look native. It just looks like they put mud on her face. It's offensive to everyone involved, everyone who's ever watched it, and everyone on the planet, really. I mean, it's literally just very offensive. This really upset Hedy. She would later say it broke her heart and that she ended up developing a protective shell around herself at this point, which is definitely a very Scorpio thing to do. She feels hurt and she feels very vulnerable, and her reaction is to protect herself. In 1943, Hedy marries the actor John Loder. John and Hedy would go on to have 2 children, a daughter named Denise and a son named Anthony. Hedy wanted roles that were challenging, but she struggled because Louis B. Mayer was not treating her like a very serious actress. Hedy stands up for herself as a result of this, and of course, Sexist Hollywood labels her as, oh my gosh, the favorite word for women that don't do what we want them to do, difficult. Difficult truly is the go-to slur for women who have the audacity to set their own standards and boundaries. So I say strive to be difficult. Strive to be difficult and surround yourself with people who celebrate your standards and your boundaries. Those are the people you want in your life. If someone thinks your standards are too high, or, your boundaries, they don't like them, you know what? That's their problem. Don't let it become your problem. Hedy lived this way. She was an absolute feminist, and she began producing her own films around this time, one of which was Dishonored Lady in 1947, where Hedy co-starred with her husband, John Loder. Dishonored Lady is a fantastic film. I really enjoy it, but at the time, it was a box office flop. Also a flop, Hedy's marriage to John. In the end, the two were just very different people. They turned out to just be kind of incompatible. Their children would actually say that John was just really too dull for Hedy. So John left when the children were quite young, and they rarely heard from him again. With John's exit, Hedy became a single mother in the 1940s, and you guys, I cried hearing her children talk about her. They describe how loving she was when they were growing up, how she made them feel so special, how she would teach them things, and how she just treasured them and truly made them feel just so worthy of love and affection. I mean, she really was an amazing mother when she was raising her children. By this point, Hedy's mother has made it to the US and she lives nearby, so she gets to spend a lot of time with Hedy and with Hedy's children, which is just so lovely. In the late 1940s, Cecil B. DeMille, the film legend, in some ways good, in some ways bad, he has begun making his biblical epic movies, my favorite of which is The 10 Commandments with Charlton Heston. I love me some Charlton Heston. Okay. So Hedy is very interested in appearing in one of these, biblical epics. So she calls Cecil B. DeMille up and says, yeah, you need to cast me. So he does. He casts her in the 1949 biblical epic Samson and Delilah. The film is a huge hit. It is the second highest grossing film of the decade, second only to Gone with the Wind, and it revives Hedy's career. Hedy is inspired by this film to make her own epic called The Loves of Three Queens, in which Hedy plays all 3 of the starring roles because she's got moxie. She's got chutzpah. The film cost millions of dollars to make, but Hedy is not very experienced. Well, okay, she's not experienced at all in how to take on a project of this magnitude. It's a huge project. And so once the film is finished, Hedy cannot find anyone in the US to distribute it. It basically just gets shelved, and Hedy loses millions of her own dollars. Then from 1951 to 1952, Hedy is married to a nightclub owner, Ted Stauffer, and following that marriage, she marries W. Howard Lee, a millionaire Texas oil man. Hedy and her children moved to Texas to be with Howard. She is now back in the role of trophy wife. It's similar to her first marriage, but Howard is very nice, so it's somewhat different. The family begins vacationing in Aspen, Colorado, and Hedy decides she needs a new project. So she builds a resort, a ski resort, an Austrian-inspired chateau. Hedy spends years perfecting this resort, and it turns out beautifully. Sadly, things in Hedy's marriage are not as picture perfect as the ski resort. Howard is very nice, but he is also an alcoholic, and Hedy begins the process of divorcing him. During the divorce, Hedy, never one to disappoint, surprises us once again when she sends in her body double to divorce court to stand in for her. In her defense, her son Tony had been in a very bad accident and he was in the hospital. Hedy didn't want to leave him alone in the hospital, but she was due in court, so in her mind this was an okay solution. I'll just send my body double. The judge did not think this was an okay situation. He was furious and he cut down Hedy's share of the divorce settlement as a result. So Hedy loses her ski resort in Aspen and she's devastated. Hedy suffered a mental health crisis as a result of this, and she describes this period of her life as a period where she was dead, which is a common theme of like disassociation. She has basically disassociated from her life. She describes a lot of feelings of just feeling like she ceased to exist. She is dead. She's no longer living. She is almost in a purgatory. This is dissociation. Hedy does come out of this and she marries her divorce lawyer. It will be her sixth and final marriage. In 1958, Hedy appears in her final film role in the movie The Female Animal. So remember how Hedy and her second husband, Gene Markey, had adopted a child? Here's where this comes back in. In the early 1960s, Hedy's teenage daughter, Denise, finds these old photos, and she sees Hedy's first adopted child, James, or Jimmy, and she asks her mother, who is this? She doesn't really remember. He was only around for like her first couple birthdays. And Hedy explains that Jimmy was her adopted child, but he had decided he wanted to go live with another family when Denise was very young, and he was adopted by that other couple. So this is a crazy story, right? But that's not even the full story, because get this. It will not be revealed until 2001, but James was actually the biological child of Hedy and her third husband, John Loder. That's right. The father of her two biological children is also the father of her first adopted child. Hedy had secretly given birth to Jimmy in 1939 and then adopted him with her then husband, Gene Markey, to hide the illegitimacy. And I'm putting illegitimacy in quotes because I think it's just a horrible term to refer to a person as illegitimate. I understand what they're trying to say. It's a term for when your parents are not married, but people are not illegitimate. They are children of God, and they should be treated as such with the dignity and humanity that requires. Don't go around calling people illegitimate, illegal. People are people. They're children of God. Show them respect. Okay. Getting off of my soapbox and back to Jimmy. So this was, Hedy's way of keeping him, because at the time, we've heard of many Hollywood actresses that would be in this similar position. And because it was so looked down upon in society and it could ruin their careers, they decide to terminate. But Hedy did not want to terminate her pregnancy. So she came up with this solution of secretly giving birth and then adopting Jimmy so that she could give him some legitimacy and make sure that she could protect her career so that she could still provide for him. I think it's an incredibly noble thing to do, honestly. I do. So Hedy goes to these great lengths to, try to be able to keep Jimmy, but when Jimmy is 7 years old, he is enrolled in a boarding school, and he becomes incredibly close to a coach there that teaches at the school. And he asks Hedy to please let this coach and the coach's wife adopt him. Hedy agrees, and Jimmy goes to live with this other family. He's legally adopted by them, and it would be many years before they ever spoke again. Around the same time that Denise brings Jimmy up, Hedy her mental condition is beginning to deteriorate a bit. A lot of this is attributed to her personal physician, a man named or nicknamed Dr. Feelgood. Dr. Feelgood's real name was Dr. Max Jacobson, and he was known for being a celebrity doctor to JFK, Lauren Bacall, Judy Garland, and more. He became known as Dr. Feelgood because of his miracle tissue regeneration shots, which were actually a cocktail of, and get ready for this, I have to read it because it's literally 9 really insane things. Okay, so the miracle tissue regeneration shots are a cocktail of amphetamines, animal hormones, bone marrow, enzymes, human placenta, painkillers, steroids, and multivitamins. I guess that would make you feel good until you're coming down off of it. Dr. Feelgood would treat Hedy with these shots, telling her that they were vitamin B shots. He would treat her with these until he finally lost his license in 1974, which, little concerned it took that long. Little concerned. Unsurprisingly though, by this point, Hedy has already developed an addiction to these vitamins, and it's an amphetamine addiction. It led to Hedy being completely unrecognizable to her children. Her behavior is completely different. Whereas she had, been this very loving, doting mother who made them feel very special, very loved. No, now she's volatile. She would lash out at them, screaming, physically hitting them. They just didn't even understand who she was anymore. It's heartbreaking. In 1966, Hedy was arrested for shoplifting. The charges would later be dropped, but this was an incredibly embarrassing incident. It led to Hedy becoming a punchline, really. If you remember when Winona Ryder was caught shoplifting back in the 90s, she was made fun of a lot. Similar circumstances. This is like the original Winona Ryder kind of deal. So she's made fun of. She also loses a role in the film Picture Mommy Dead. That was supposed to be her last film, but she ends up being replaced by Zsa Zsa Gabor. Starting in the 1970s, Hedy lives mostly in seclusion. Her image had been so glamorous and so beautiful all of her life. Despite her incredible intelligence, her beauty is what most people had admired and what they valued and what they complimented her on. And so it was very difficult for Hedy to reconcile that as she got older, she couldn't live up to this incredibly glamorous image because you age. It's natural. It's the natural progression of life. But this is someone who her whole life, she's been valued and told that her value and her worth as a human being is in her beauty. Always the pioneer, Hedy was one of the first women who had her plastic surgery scars concealed behind her ears, behind her knees. If she wanted to tuck on her arm, she'd get the scar placed in the crook of her elbow. She was suggesting these things to her plastic surgeon. This really set a trend, and for many years, actresses would cite Hedy as an example during consultations with their own plastic surgeons. Hedy hid away a lot because of how mean the press was to her. They would publish articles calling her ugly, saying she was unrecognizable in her old age, and I will honestly never understand what makes anyone think that someone else's body is their business. I really don't. I mean, unless someone is using an altered image to sell something, I just don't think it's my business how they look or what they do with their body. It's just not. It's really quite incredibly sad that society does this. It really sets us up to judge ourselves and we don't realize it, because what happens is when you're judging someone else's appearance, 9 times out of 10, you begin directing that inwardly. You're looking at the way other women look, the way they mother, their relationships, and sooner or later, you start to judge yourself, or maybe you feel judged, so you judge others, and unconscious attempt to make it yourself like feel better. I've been there. I've done that. I do not claim to be perfect, but if I can share any message through telling the story of women like Hedy, it would be judge not, lest ye be judged. Showing empathy and kindness to others is the key to showing empathy and kindness to yourself. And seeing the beauty in others, that's the key to seeing beauty in yourself. By the late 1980s, Hedy had spent about 40 years of her life thinking that her frequency hopping technology that she invented with George had never been used by the US military. But she finds out around the late 80s that the US military, when they seized her patent, they actually did use it as the framework for frequency hopping technology. The man who was responsible for setting up the frequency hopping technology that was based on Hedy and George's invention, he actually later wrote a dedication thanking Hedy for originating the technology and laying the groundwork to make this possible. So beginning in the early 1990s, Hedy finally starts to get a little bit of very, very overdue recognition. In 1997, Hedy was awarded with the Millstar Award in recognition of the invention, but by this point, Hedy did not want to be seen in public, so her husband Anthony accepted on her behalf. Hedy's invention serves as the basis today for secure Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and GPS. The market value is about $30 billion, but Hedy was never paid. In the last couple years of her life, Hedy locked herself away and she spoke to her own children and grandchildren mostly on the phone rather than seeing them in person. She would spend up to 7 hours a day on the phone, but she hardly ever saw anyone face to face. She'd had a lot of plastic surgery. She was so self-conscious. She tried so hard to keep up with the image of the most beautiful woman in the world, and she couldn't because time gets us all. And it's incredibly sad that, that just got to her so much, that got in her head so much that she missed out on spending those last days with her family. On January 19th, 2000, Hedy Lamarr passed away peacefully in her sleep from heart disease at the age of 85. She was cremated and her son Anthony spread her ashes in Austria's Vienna woods. I think that Hedy and I would have gotten along. I say this because Hedy, while speaking with someone about an autobiography she wanted to write, she summed up her life philosophy using a poem written by Kent Keith. This was a poem that she would read often to her children when they were growing up. It is called The Paradoxical Commandments, and it reads in part, quote, "People are illogical, unreasonable, and self-centered. Love them anyway. If you do good, people will accuse you of selfish, ulterior motives. Do good anyway. The biggest men and women with the biggest ideas can be shot down by the smallest men and women with the smallest minds. Think big anyway. What you spend years building may be destroyed overnight. Build anyway. Give the world the best you have and you'll get kicked in the teeth. Give the world the best you have anyway." End quote. Pretty much sums it up. You don't have any control over what other people do. You don't have any control about what the world gives you or does to you. What you do have control over is yourself. So be a good person and do good things. What an incredible woman. If you'd like to hear more stories about incredible women who also just happen to be beautiful like Hedy, then I will link the entire Beauty Biography playlist right here so you can check those out. I'll also link one of my favorite episodes, Vivian Lee. Let me know in the comments, who would you like to see in next week's episode? I hope to see you there, and until then, you take care of yourself. Bye.